Welcome back after the ad break, and let's continue looking at activities on rural settlements. Now, first of all, if you look at this diagram over here, study the two rural settlements diagrams in figure 3.2.1b and 3.2.1c and complete the table. Now, first of all, immediately what I can see over here, I can see that one rural settlement is dispersed and one is nucleated. Now, when I talk about nucleated and dispersed, nucleated means when the people live close to one another. And dispersed, as you can see, they live quite far from one another. Now, if you look at the table over here, for instance, what's the function in 3.2.2b and what's the function in 3.2.2c? Now, as you can see, both is rural settlements, so it's unifunctional, means they're only concentrated on a primary activity. And this can be farming or stock farming or crop farming, for example. Now, 3.2.1.c gives me a clear indication, because if you look what's taking place over there, it's cultivated land, so crop farming are being practiced over there. As you can see, there's some crop farming taking place over there as well. Now, if you look at the settlement pattern, I've already mentioned it to you. 3.2.1b is where, look at the settlements quite close to one another, that's nucleated. And if you look at the settlement pattern, and 3.2.1c is dispersed, they're quite far from one another. Now, very importantly over here, keep the advantages and disadvantages of these settle patterns in mind. The advantages of a nucleated settlement, for instance, is the people are safer and they can share their equipment. The disadvantage of a nucleated pattern is too much interaction and maybe profit needs to be shared. Now, if you look at dispersed patterns, disadvantages, it can be unsafe, quite isolated from human contact. Okay, advantages, profit can be more because more land are being used to farm. Now, if you look at the factors affecting the site, why did they choose this location? Now, as you can see, I assume over there is a river, so they are very close to a water resource to use for irrigation and drinking water to provide the stock with water. I assume this are being used as stock farming, and this is grazing land. So if you look at this pattern over here, this nucleated settlement do crop farming and stock farming, whereas this farmer only concentrate on crop farming. Now, if you look at factors affecting the situation, now very importantly, look where the settlements are. They are not situated next to the river. Why not? They chose the settlement over here because it's a dry point settlement. What happens with rivers during seasonal rainfall? The water level increases. So you can't go and build your farmsteads close to the river, because what's going to happen? You're going to be in the floodplain. So the areas where they are situated are dry point settlements. They are safe from the river when it's in flooding. And as you can see, especially with the crop farming over there, they are situated close to the main transport route to have access to the transport route and to be able to go and sell their crops wherever they need to go, the market is. Okay, so very importantly, go and look at the factors affecting the site as well as the situation of any rural settlement. Now, let's continue with urban settlements. Now, on the urban profile shown in figure 3.3.3b, draw a line graph to show how land value changes as you move towards the CBD. Now, I'm just going to draw roughly figure 3.3.3b on here, because there was a hell of a lot of information that we actually don't need. But if you look at the urban profile, if you want to define an urban profile, it's basically a cross-section, it's a side view of an urban area. And obviously, what have we learned so far? Our tallest buildings is situated, and that is known as CBD. And as we move out, we have the zone of decay. And if we move further out, to that region over there, we have our rural areas. Now, if you look at the land values, by drawing a simple graph, what will happen with the land values as soon as you move closer to the CBD? This will happen. The land values increase if we move closer to the CBD. Now, we've learned in the previous episodes as well, the reason why the buildings are so tall and we experience skyscrapers, because it's cheaper to move up. There's not a lot of space left in the CBD, the land values is extremely high. And we also look at outlying business districts, people leaving the CBD because they can't afford it and open their businesses somewhere else. Now, how does building density changes as you move towards the center of the city? Now, building density means the amount of buildings close together. So obviously, if you look at the CBD of a business, of an urban area, what happens to the building density? It definitely increases as you move to the CBD. So you can say the building density increases when we move to the CBD. Now, what does the CBD stand for again? Central Business District. Now, if you look at question number 3, explain your answer in question number 2. Now, the reason the land is very expensive, like we've mentioned it, and the land is very expensive, closest to building, and that's the reason why they built the properties very closer to one another. So it's because it's so expensive, and that's the reason the density is so high. Now, why would an office park, for example, move away from the central business district? We discussed it already. The land is cheaper. So as soon as you move away from the CBD, it becomes a little bit cheaper. And because of the high density of people, there's a lot of congestion taking place. The pollution levels are high, especially noise pollution. So people tend to move away from the CBD to save some money, and because of the amount of pollution that they experience. And once again, because of the congestion, it's much easier to find parking outside the CBD than inside the CBD. Now, if you look at this diagram over here, refer to figure 3.3.5a below, which shows a settlement typical of the South African urban landscape. It shows urban functions or services of a low and higher order. Now, very importantly over here, when we looked at urban settlements, we looked at high order services and low order services. Low order services are services that you are required on a daily basis. You are not willing to travel further than, let's say, 5 kilometers to get that service. For instance, you are not willing to travel more than 50 kilometers just to go and buy a bread and a milk, for example. But a high order function, a high order service, you are willing to travel quite far. For instance, you need to go and see a neurosurgeon. You are willing to travel a great distance to make sure that you can acquire that service. Now, just to identify over there. Now, over there, we have a lab research, people doing research. There's a flour mill, there's a bakery, there's a cafe where people can enjoy some drinks and hospitality. There's an SABC, a hospital, and the bakery. Now let's quickly look at the questions that follow. Now, what is a settlement? Now, a settlement is where people live, where a bunch of activities takes place. Now, we looked at rural settlements, we already discussed it. It's usually where primary activities takes place. And then we look at urban settlements, it's usually where secondary and tertiary activities take place. Now, if you look at the next question, is the settlement shown in figure 3.3.5a a rural or urban settlement? Now, let's just quickly go back to it. Do we see any primary activities taking place in that diagram? No. But I do see secondary activities, the flour mill. I do see tertiary activities, for instance, the bakery, selling their goods, the bank, and hospitals. And then I see quaternary activities as well, where there's researching taking place. Now, is this a settlement? We've just answered this question. It's definitely an urban settlement. Give one reason for your answers, because there's no rural activities taking place in the diagram. Now, distinguish between low order functions and high order functions. I've done it just when we started, but let me quickly answer the question once again. Low order functions are functions that you are not willing to travel very far. For instance, a hairdresser to go and buy bread and milk. But a high order function, you are willing to travel far. For instance, to go and see a specialized doctor, or even to go and buy expensive goods as a Ferrari. Okay. If we look at our next question, from figure 3.3.5a, identify one low order function and one high order function. Let's quickly just go and have a look at the diagram again. A low order function over there, for instance, is your bakery. You're not willing to travel very far, you're just going to buy cake. The cafe over there, and the bank. But the chemical lab are definitely a high order function. The SABC is a high order function. And the hospital definitely might have been a high order function as well. Okay, explain the meaning of the term sphere of influence of a function or a service. Now, the sphere of influence is basically how far are people willing to travel. Now, if you look at low order functions and services, the sphere of influence are quite small. But let's say, for instance, you are a specialized doctor, it means your sphere of influence will be much bigger, because that means people are willing to travel further to acquire your service or your product. Will the hospital or the cafe have a larger sphere of influence? Now, obviously, the hospital will have a much bigger sphere of influence, because people are much willing to travel further if they're diagnosed with a sickness or they need medical care. And there's only certain doctors who specializes in that type of treatment. Where the cafe's sphere of influence are going to be much smaller, people from the surrounding area will come and visit the cafe. People are not willing to travel a great distance just to come and have a sandwich or a cool drink at the type of cafe. Now, the explanation of your answer I've just done above. Okay, the bakery is an example of a light industry. What is a light industry? It's a light industry that produces goods but doesn't create a lot of noise or air pollution. And where do we find these light industries? Close to our residential areas, and usually on the outskirts of the CBD. Now, unlike a heavy industry, the bakery can be located close to the hospital. Explain why this bakery doesn't have to be located outside the city. Now, we looked at heavy industries. Why are heavy industries usually located outside urban areas? First of all, because of the noise and air pollution. When we look at heavy industries, we look at manufacturing like coal plants, electricity plants. So these heavy industries are located outside the CBD because of the noise pollution, because of the air pollution, and another reason why is because they need to be close to transport networks. Now, the reason why the bakery doesn't need to be there, because it doesn't create a lot of pollution and it needs to be close to its consumers. If you look at the bakeries, if you look at the products, it can be perishable, so it can go off. So it can sell directly to the consumers, and most importantly, it doesn't create a lot of pollution. Now, the next question, why is it important for the bakery to have a central location? So the reason why it's important is because it's perishable goods. Keep in mind, the bakery, the bread can go off, the cakes can go off. And another reason why is because it's very close to the consumers. It's a low order product, so people don't need to travel very far to get this product on a daily basis. And lastly, it's close access to the consumers. It's close around a lot of people. As you can see on the diagram, there's many other activities taking place surrounding the bakery. Now, our last question With reference to figure 3.3.5a, explain why many people from the surrounding rural areas are attracted to the settlement. Now, obviously, if you think about what we learned, we experienced rural-urban migration. Now, if you can imagine, why do people want to go and live in an area where what this figure shows? Obviously, many employment opportunities, better service delivery. I mean, there's hospitals, there's definitely probably going to be schools. So there's entertainment like the cafe where people can go and socialize, and there's excellent, good infrastructure. Now, what's not added in there, there's probably good education systems, and that's the reason we experience with rural-urban migrations, because it makes people want to move over there. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you with the next episode, and we're going to continue with our revision exercises. Thank you, and cheers.